Hi everyone, I'm Grace Lee, co-director of program with Nancy. Today it's an honor to introduce today's speaker. To the next slide, Lyndia Downie. So I try to keep it brief, but it's really amazing to hear what she and her team has achieved. So bear with me. Lyndia Downie is a longtime president and executive director of Pine Street Inn, having led since 2000 and served across the organization for 40 years. Under her leadership, Pine Street has become New England's largest provider of supportive housing for individuals moving out of homelessness, with 1,100 units today and another 99 to open within next few months, representing a major housing expansion over the past several years. Pine House operates a $100 million budget across 4 shelters and 39 housing locations in Boston and Brookline, serving more than 2,400 people daily through street outreach, emergency shelter, supportive housing, and job training. Its social enterprise iCater delivers high-quality meals to customers including school, camps, human service, and non-profit organizations, while providing workforce training for people to find employment and move forward self-sufficient. Through sustained collaboration with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, a city of Boston, and partner agency, Pine Street has helped drive one of the nation's lowest rate of unsheltered homelessness, just 2.5% locally, compared to rates exceeding 50% in peer cities like San Francisco. Looking ahead, Lyndia is guiding a bold plan to up to 500 new units of supportive housing, with 250 already in development, powered in part of a transformative $50 million commitment from the Yaoki Foundation. A trusted policy voice, Lyndia advised city, state, and federal leaders, and has presented Pine Street housing expansion strategy at national convening, including National Alliance to End Homelessness and Housing First Partners. Her service, including role with the Massachusetts Council of Human Service Provider, the Massachusetts Housing Shelter Alliance, Eastern Bank Board of Advisor, and Franklin Square House Foundation. She has co-taught a solution of homelessness course at the Harvard Kennedy School and is a bar fellow. Her leadership has widely recognized, repeatedly named among the top 100 women-led business in Massachusetts by the Women's Edge and Boston Globe, honored by Boston Magazine as one of the 100 most influential Bostonians, and the recipient of Massachusetts Council of the House Human Service CEO Award of Excellence and Henry Shattuck's City Champion Awards and Greater Boston Chamber's Pinnacle Awards, the New England's Women's Leadership Awards, and University of Vermont's 2020 Alumni Association Award. Lyndia holds honorary doctorates from Boston College and Franklin State University and New England Law Boston and William James College. She is a graduate of the University of Vermont. With that, let me welcome Lyndia to the stage.
Thanks, Grace. I don't even write these bios, seriously. I mean, anyways, thanks for being here tonight and for venturing out on such a chilly, cold night. I hate these early nights when it gets cold and rainy because we get really, really busy. Everybody who's stayed out through the summer is now saying, you know, it's raining, I'm wet, I'm cold, so it'll be a busy night back at the shelter. I thought I would talk a little bit about how I ended up at Pine Street, and then a little bit about some of the policy work that has led us to the strategy we've got, both in Boston and the strategy we at Pine Street have deployed. I know Dr. Eileen Riley was here last fall, and we worked closely with Eileen as well. She's one of the psychiatrists that we have on loan. Usually, I think every other week she's down helping us. So bear with me a little bit. I'm gonna come back to this picture in a minute, and you'll probably wonder, why do I have a picture of me dressed as an elf? Well, I'll tell you why in a minute. I was born in Scotland. My family immigrated here when I was 7. My father's brother had gotten a job offer at Stanley Tools in New Britain, Connecticut, and he sponsored us to come, and I grew up in Connecticut. I went to the University of Vermont. I know there's at least some, I hope, UVMers in the room, and I moved to Boston because my 2 college roommates moved to Boston, and it sounded like a great idea at the time. I couldn't find a job in Vermont. I had a degree in environmental science. There were really very few jobs, and I thought I was going to go to law school. So I came to Boston, worked for a couple of years, applied to law school, and I needed a 6-month job in between my application to law school and finding out where was I going to go. And a friend of mine was a volunteer at Pine Street, and he said, look, they hire people for the winter, usually for like 6 months. That would be perfect. So I had it in my head, and then my roommate at the time went to Boston College, and we were sitting outside the apartment, and she got the BC Alumni magazine, and I picked up the magazine, and there was an article about Paul Sullivan, who had gone to Boston College, who started Pine Street in the very 1969 is actually when Paul, the inn became a private nonprofit, but Paul had really been involved in funding it. And Paul had just died, and it was a story about the impact Paul had had in Boston and starting Pine Street. Back then it was just for men. And so very different than what it is now. And I tore the article out and I thought, oh, my friend Ari told me about that place. This is the same place. And a couple weeks later, I saw an ad in the Boston Globe. I borrowed a dress from my roommate because I did not own a dress at the time. I rode my bike from Brighton down to the South End, which was, I'll tell you, quite the journey. And I went in, and the woman who hired me, who I'm still very close to, left me downstairs in the lobby with the men. And I learned later that if you could survive down there for 30 or 40 minutes, you probably could work at Pine Street. But it was very chaotic. It was fall, so it wasn't busy, but the guys were there. A lot of the guys were in tough shape. Some of the guys were very friendly. Some of the guys wouldn't talk to me. I thought they forgot all about me. And finally she came back down and said, oh, come upstairs and I'll talk to you. So I took a 6-month job. I was working mostly with the volunteer department and doing some work with clothing and in-kind donors. And the fellow who ran the shelter at the time, his name was Richie McDonnell, who became a great mentor, who was someone who really understood what it was work to work with people who are struggling and have so much trauma, but who really did know how to meet people where they were. And he really understood how to help empower people. And anyways, and he was constantly around. So I took this 6-month job, and every day at 3 o'clock I had to go downstairs and answer the phone at the front desk. I have no idea why. I had to take the console. Some of you that are young won't even know what a console is, I'm telling you. It was a phone console. I would take it downstairs. There was a screwdriver, a butter knife actually taped underneath it, and you use that to screw the console into the cord that went into the floor. It was quite the technological, I don't even know what to call it, but anyways. And so that was really my first exposure to working with the guests, and I loved it. The men would come up looking for things, people would call looking for the guys. I got a chance to really spend a lot of time with staff. And so when the 6 months were up, the woman who hired me said, look, there's another job opening up. And I said, oh, I'll do 1 more year, and that's it, really, that, I'm gonna go do something else. And that second year, Rich McDonnell said to me at the holidays, we really try and make it festive for the guests, and we do gifts. We have a lot of donors who come in and volunteers who help us wrap gifts, and we decorate, and my job was to dress up like an elf and make it very festive and play music. And I was so dumb and naive that I was like, okay. So he sent me up to Nealon Street, where, again, I'm aging myself, and there was a costume store up on Nealon Street. I pick up my costume, I come back. This was the year before, I couldn't find that picture, and I get the costume on, and of course I'm running late to go downstairs and meet the volunteers, and it's this skimpy little thing that's really low cut with up to my thighs, and I thought, I will absolutely kill him. And I walked downstairs and he said, I can't believe you were dumb enough to fall for that. And I thought, I can't either. You could not do it now, I know that, but this was the second year. So I want you to know, I did learn something from that very first year of doing that work. Same costume guy, by the way, but he was lovely giving me a real costume. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in Boston around homelessness, and this is a picture of my friend Sam. I'll come back to Sam at the end, but Sam is the person who taught me about what is now called Housing First or Housing with Supports, and I'll tell you Sam's story in a minute. He really interesting story and a lovely man. For those of you that don't know what we do at Pine Street, we do street outreach, so we have 2 vans that go out every night from 9 at night until 5 a.m. Most of the vans are really what I would call the very basics, right? We take out blankets, we take out soup, sandwiches, basic first aid. Typically, 2 nights a week, we have somebody from Healthcare for the Homeless with us. If not, Dr. Jim, someone else from Healthcare for the Homeless, and that's fabulous because then we can do some actual healthcare work right on the street. We run 4 emergency shelters, 1 for women and the rest are for men. And by the way, about 20% of the folks we see are women, which pretty much matches what you see out there. Pretty much looks like the street number, looks like the number in the rest of the country. We have 1,100 units of housing with support, and we have 99 in the pipeline. Those will be open in a couple of months. We have what I call, we call it telephone on-site problem solving. It's really a bit of a triage program where we try and solve people's problems before they come into shelter. Some of it's on the phone, some of it's in person, but it is what I would call very short-term intervention for people that don't really have to be in shelter. And it is everything from, I'm stuck in Boston, I'm really from Springfield, can you get me a bus ticket home? We verify people have a safe place to go and we buy them a bus ticket. To, we've filled up people's gas tanks. We've done quite a bit of family mediation where if someone will go to treatment, will agree to treatment or going to job training, they can go back home. About 18% of our guests are gone within a week, and this is part of us helping get people out really, really quickly if we can. Now, some of these folks are going to self-resolve on our own, and then some folks that don't get that immediate help are going to end up in shelter for longer. I will say that most people are not going to be able to get out the door with problem solving. It's just too many things that are keeping them unhoused. We have a small program called Rapid Rehousing. This is what HUD calls it. It's not really rapid, but this is for folks who really need first and last month's rent. Maybe they are on Social Security and they're having a hard time with first and last. Maybe they have a job, but they can't pay rent, and if we could help them with first and last and a roommate or a second job, they can pay the rent on their own eventually. So most of our folks are gone by the time they get to this housing placement program, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then we have a number of programs that really wrap around street outreach and shelter and our housing. We have a catering company that provides food for other smaller nonprofits, and we use it as a training program. We don't fully fund the whole thing, but we fund probably 80% of it. And what we do is we provide bulk meals for other smaller places that don't have big kitchens. We have a huge kitchen. We do about 3,000 meals a day. And we started this business because doing another 1,000 meals a day, frankly, production's not that hard for us. Transportation's hard, production's not that hard. So the catering company's grossing about $3 million a year, and those are paid customers. We use the money to pay our trainees, either our tenants, our guests in shelter. We take referrals from other nonprofits, and folks get some very hands-on training time in terms of learning Safe Serve, which is what folks need in the restaurant industry or the food services industry. And then we do a financial literacy piece for people. We do a number of other, we do a mindfulness class, believe it or not, which is very well received, surprisingly. And then we do mock interviews and really the whole gamut of helping people get back into the workplace. We also have a housekeeping training program. That's not on there. We have a program for folks who are getting sober that want some long-term treatment. That's on the grounds of the Shattuck Hospital. We have a behavioral health team that supports both street outreach, shelter, and our housing team. And then we have a homeless court. We didn't start the homeless court. A judge named Kathy Coffey, who went to BC Law, started this court. She's a judge over at West Roxbury District Court, and she kept seeing homeless people come through the courts again and again and bouncing kind of back into jail or back out to the streets. And so she got the Boston Municipal Court to agree to let her start this pilot that is now no longer a pilot, it's part of the Boston Municipal Court. And she can expunge misdemeanors and very low-level felonies for people who are getting sober, going to work, getting housing. It's just a way to get some of the criminal stuff off people's background, not for serious stuff, but for minor stuff. And I'll give you an example. We had a fellow, this was about 2 years ago. He was an Army vet. He was in his late 60s. And he got out of the Army, never married. He drove a truck for a living, and he had a series of very small strokes. And after like the third stroke, the trucking company said, you can't drive anymore. Lost his apartment, was sleeping in his car, ended up at Pine Street. And while he was sleeping in his car, he was getting tickets like every single day. He had about $6,000 worth of tickets. Of course, he couldn't pay it. So every time he went to renew his license or try to get a job, it popped up. And I remember him getting in front of the judge, and the judge said to him, how did you get all these tickets? And he explained to her, and he said, I've never had a criminal thing in my life, ever. And he said, now I'm 70 years old, and this is holding me back. She can also waive all those fees. So it's been a really fabulous program for us, and we're very excited to have it as part of our program. There's a pretty recent book out by a guy named Greg Coburn. He's originally someone who was on the investment side and then is now teaching at the University of Washington. And he and Clayton Aldern did some really interesting research. And it turns out that what really, and I think we've known this a long time, it's nice to have the data to back it up, that what's really, where you see high rates of homelessness for the most part is where you have really expensive housing markets. And what's happening is people who have any kind of disability or any major long-term crisis, it might be healthcare, it might be a divorce, it might be a death of a partner or a spouse. That combined with high housing and the disability level is really what's driving a lot of people into homelessness. And it really does run the gamut from folks who are working at lower wage jobs. Maybe they've been living with a family member, maybe they're not on lease, the family member passes away, or the family member moves, they can no longer pay the rent on their own, so we see a lot of that. We see a lot of people who get sick, a lot of healthcare issues, and while people have insurance, if you can't work for 3 or 4 months while you're sick and you're living on the edge, you're not going to be able to keep your apartment. So there is a very strong link between high housing costs, obviously, and then the disability piece. And the analogy he uses, which I think is terrific, is it's musical chairs, right? If you have a broken leg and you're playing musical chairs, the people without the broken leg are going to get the chairs first. But if you've got a broken leg, you're going to have a hard time getting the chairs. So if you look at, for example, places like Detroit and places who up until recently have pretty affordable housing, their homeless rates are pretty low because even if you're disabled or you're on a fixed income, you can typically find housing. So when I took this job, we brought in a consultant who up until about 5 years ago, till she retired, she was kind of our strategy consultant. Her name is Alice. She went to Harvard Business School, and a foundation recommended her to me. I was really frustrated with the number of folks that I'd look out in our park and see men and women who had been sitting there for a long time. And I kept saying, why can't we house Mr. Smith or Mr. Jones? And staff would say, oh, he can't be housed, and we've tried that, it didn't work. And what Alice did is she came in and she looked at every single one of our programs, looked at cost per person, looked at the outcomes, and gave us lots of data. But the takeaway of the data really was that most people are getting out of homelessness pretty quickly. I want to say I wouldn't wish homelessness on anybody. It's a horribly traumatic experience on top of trauma you've already had before you got in the door. So, but what we're seeing is we actually have quite a few people, as you can see, even though, so this 42%, those folks are gone typically within, I think, within 30 days. About 42% of our guests are self-resolving. And what do I mean by that? They may not be perfect, but they're going back to a family member. They're going back to some place they were. Maybe they're getting a little bit of help from us or from someone else, but they're anxious to get out of homelessness because it is no fun. And so people get really motivated, frankly, to move out. And then there's that group in the middle, and that's the group where we really try and work on rapid rehousing. They're not going to get out of homelessness on their own. They're going to need some probably short-term help. But over the long term, we think most people in this group can sustain some level of housing and not be in shelter. Not everybody, because some of that group comes back. This little tiny, not tiny, but this group at the bottom, they take up that 22% of our guests in shelter take up over half the bed nights. So for people who stay with us year after year after year, they take up a ton of capacity. And up until we did this, that group just stayed on the streets or in shelter. And the street numbers look somewhat similar. You've got a lot more turnover at the top if you look at the street numbers, but the shelter numbers, you tend to have a little bit more stability through the entire, all these numbers. But the big takeaway from us was that this kind of small group that's stuck in shelter is never going to move out, and we had not been moving them out. And it was mortifying. I gotta tell you, we had some people that were homeless for 10 years, and everything we did didn't work. And we tried to house them, or we helped them maybe get into treatment. We tried to get them mental health treatment, and for lots of different reasons, some systemic, some money, we had a really hard time getting those folks out. So at the time we were doing this, there was some research happening in New York. A guy named Dennis Culhane, who went to Boston College, is now at UPenn, wrote a study about savings by housing long-term people, putting them in housing with supports. And he looked at emergency and healthcare savings. And the first study was done in New York. It's been replicated all over the place, including one we did. And what he found was, at minimum, the cost to house folks that were long-term stayers was going to cover the cost of housing with support. And in some cases, like in here, there's actually some pretty significant savings because people stop going to the ER, they don't get inpatient as often. And so that was happening at the same guy. Another guy in New York named Sam Tambaris, who was a psychologist who was working at Bellevue Hospital, started asking homeless people what did they want, and everybody said, I want a place to live, or I want a room. And so Sam really started this idea of putting people in housing, and what we started to do was really look at that bottom list and figure out how we could tackle that bottom list. I'll come back to that in a minute, but some of you know that every year that Boston does a homeless census, just like every city in the country that gets HUD money is required to do a census. It's not a perfect census, but what we do is look at from one year to the next. It's very apples to apples, right? The shelter count's accurate, not hard to count. Street count's always a little bit off, but it's off every year, so it's kind of, it's kind of an apples to apples, right? And you'll see Boston, we were doing okay for a bit. We had a big movement there in the mid 2000s. And then COVID, nobody was coming into shelter during COVID because people were terrified of getting COVID. And so our shelter numbers, ironically, went way down. Street numbers went up. And what you're seeing now is people starting to come back into shelter. What's interesting, though, about this number, the little blue number is the street count in Boston. And that's the shelter count. It's not who you see every single night. It's just that one night of the year. It's winter time. But it is, again, that apples to apples from one year to the next. We have we're in the top 5 of the lowest street counts in the country compared to cities our size. Most other cities have, hundreds of people on the street. And a lot of it is we've had good outreach. We've had a real focus on housing. We've had good leadership at the mayoral level, and I would say certainly at the state level. What is interesting about this number is even when we've seen the shelter number go up, we've managed to keep the street number pretty low. And so based on that data you saw in the last slide, which is the group of long-term stayers on the street and in shelter, we have a by name list now that the city maintains. So anybody comes into shelter, we take their name, they get a swipe card, and they can swipe and let us know they're in for the night, and we'll assign them a bed. And so that's how the city is tracking the data. So that when you come in, we know how many bed nights you have. We know if you're staying just at our shelter or you're staying at the city shelter too. Again, it's not really sophisticated data, but it's enough for us to do some tracking. And we do have more personal data for folks, but the city's tracking the name of every single person who's been homeless for more than a year. And every quarter, we meet as a group, so Pine Street, Healthcare for the Homeless, the city's housing authority, the city's office of, the mayor's office of housing, all the other providers, and we literally go through a list. The case managers walk through the list and try and figure out who's next, who's had a housing application, who's ready to move but won't go, if someone's ready to move, who's moving them in, and so it's a pretty interesting process. And it sounds fabulous on paper, but if you're ever in those meetings, it's much more complicated. You know, sometimes we can't find people. Sometimes people are in the hospital. Sometimes people disappear for a while. Sometimes people say, no, I don't want to live in that place you found for me. I'm just going to stay outside. So a lot of things happen. But the point of that by name list is to really work at it and work at it and work at it until we get people housed. Part of the reason the street number has been so low is because of that. That real effort to focus on the long-term stayers. The reason we started focusing on the long-term stayers is that we felt they would never get out of homelessness unless we provided housing plus support services. Too many complicated problems for people, right? Mental health, health issues, substance use, and a whole range of sometimes all three of those issues. And people just were never going to make it in what I would call more traditional housing, right? Even if they could pay the rent, they really needed more support to hold on to their housing. And so this entire strategy has been replicated now across the country, and in Boston in particular, where we don't really have the ability to build more shelter, not just on the money side, but from a zoning standpoint, really hard to site shelter. If we keep moving the long-term stayers out, more folks can come in without us having to add shelter beds. So we've been really focused on this long-term stayer group. That means that, you know, if you're only in shelter for a couple weeks, we're going to leave you on your own if we haven't been able to problem solve, and you're going to have to figure some of it out. It means if you fit in that middle group, we're going to work really hard. We don't have enough money in the middle for everybody. We're going to work hard to help you stabilize and get out, at least for, you know, hopefully a few years. But it means the group at the bottom is getting a lot of our attention. So when we first developed all this data, we really started pushing this down to the bottom. We stopped doing housing ourselves, we stopped running our own nursing clinic, and we moved all our staff to work with that group that was staying for the long term. And what the very first year that we started placing those people, we got a grant from HUD. It was a conversion grant. They said you have to stop doing transitional programs, and we got enough to house 30 people out in the market. We went up and leased units in the market, and we provided support, and we learned a lot, I'll tell you that. But that 30, we actually for the first time ever had empty shelter beds. And for every, I think 35 people we place, 154 new people can come in the front door and stay the average length of stay. So there's a huge amount of incentive for us to really try and get this right. But the first couple of years that we started doing this, we did our very first 30-person pilot. It was fascinating. Staff were, you know, going over to people's units at 2 in the morning and unplugging toilets, and people telling us, you know, the lights didn't work and it just needed a light bulb. We learned a lot, I'll tell you that. But we also learned after that first pilot, 83% of the folks that everybody said couldn't be housed were still in housing, 83%. And we thought, well, that's interesting. 100% of them were homeless before this. Maybe there's more to this than we think. So that's really when we started shifting into doing more and more housing and then trying to scale it up. And you'll see the blue bar is shelter, the green bar is housing. We've pretty much shifted the ratios over the past about 15 years from mostly doing shelter to now mostly doing housing. And so we've got a pretty robust movement into housing, but it's, you know, it's not easy, and housing first and housing with supports is not for the faint of heart. So this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Why did we start doing housing first? Well, housing first is not so much a thing as it is a philosophy that you've got to get people housed so they're stable enough to work on all their other issues. It is so hard when you're on the street and in shelter to work on getting sober, getting your mental health dealt with, getting a job, even healthcare. We're really lucky that we have healthcare for the homeless, but the challenges are enormous. And once people get into a place, in a stable place, all of these other things go away. And the other thing that happens is you stop this revolving door of emergency room, inpatient, back out, court, back out. This stops that and stops that really revolving door for people, not for everybody, but for most people. And I want to be clear that most people don't all of a sudden get really healthy. They just stop using the ER, they stop being inpatient, they tend to use a lot more outpatient services. It's not as if miraculously everybody's well, but it's a different way to address people's issues that's much more cost effective and frankly so much better, obviously for the people going through it. But you'll see, you know, this study's a little dated. My guess is the savings are a little bit higher. We did a big study. We had, I think 13,000 names through Mass Health, and we had a control group that looked at folks who didn't get housed and folks who did, and those were the savings. There's been a whole bunch of other studies, reduction in police contacts and arrests, and then a reduction in service costs. So when you hear people talking about housing with support and all of this judgment around it, it's only directed to a very small group of people, and it's the folks you all are seeing outside when you're walking around Beacon Hill that are talking to themselves, or folks that you're saying, what's this person doing out here and how are they ever going to get housed? This is for that group. It's not for everybody else who we think will with some minimal help from us or some, what's the word, a little bit of self-resolution plus a little bit of help can probably get out, right? And so it's very targeted. During COVID, we had a really unique opportunity. This is the YWCA that a lot of you have walked by it, seen it. It was a hotel and a series of apartments. The building went up for sale during COVID. It was going to be converted to a hotel, and the deal fell apart because of COVID. And so Beacon companies bought the building and asked us to be a partner. And so we are the partner on the service side. We have 111 men and women living there in the units. We provide support, and Beacon provides the property management. It's a beautiful building if you've ever been in there. The common space is great. There's a theater on the ground floor, there's a restaurant, there's a school on the bottom floor, and there is, I would say, not even a blip. I'm over there sometimes in the lobby. The kids are walking through, people are heading into the theater. It's lovely, and the Lyric, which is the theater downstairs, is giving us free tickets to the rehearsals, to their dress rehearsals. So we've got a lot of tenants going down to watch shows, and it's lovely. It's close to everything. You know, people can walk to the grocery store, they can get on the bus, and get on the train. It's been terrific to have it. The rooms are small, but there's very small studio apartments with their own bathroom, a tiny kitchenette, you know, enough room for a bed, a dresser, and a little kitchen table. This is a new building that we just opened last year in Jamaica Plain. This was an old site that I was telling people earlier, for many years we did food, shelter, and clothing. That's about all we did, and we were pretty good at it. Clothing was the bane of our life, because for every 1 bag of men's clothing, we got 10 bags of women's clothing. There isn't anybody in this room who doesn't know what I'm talking about. None of you. My husband used to say, that's the proof that all you do is shop. Anyways, but the problem, of course, is we have so many more men than women, and we had so much women's clothes, we didn't know what to do with it. And we never had enough men's clothes, ever. We could never get enough socks or pants, anything, shirts, you name it. And so we started a thrift store. We owned this warehouse in Jamaica Plain. We started a thrift store, and we sold women's clothing mostly. And we did okay, but it wasn't really a good training ground for many of our guests. And I think maybe 1 year of the 7 or 8 years we ran it, we broke even. And we owned the site, and I really wanted to do something different in it. And I took Bart Mitchell from Community Builders, they're a community development corporation, over to see it. I had taken 3 or 4 developers over, and they kept saying, oh, maybe 40, 50 units. It's just under a 1 acre site. And Bart said, no, I think we can do more than that. And so this is now 240 units. We have one side of the building, 140. The other units are on the other side. The other units are 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. Ours are all studio apartments. It's beautiful. You can't see the outside space, I don't think, from here, but it's right on Washington Street in Jamaica Plain. It's a fabulous building. It's fully leased up, and this is the kind of stuff we need to do, though, if we're going to get at some scale. Boston's been typically pretty afraid of scale. We've got some real height on this. You know, I think we're 5 stories. We wanted 6, and we negotiated with the neighborhood, and we got 5 stories. And then we have one other building that's a hotel in Dorchester that we're converting the hotel rooms into small studio apartments, and I think we'll be leasing up there right after the first of the year. So I want to close with, and then see what questions people have, with my friend Sam. So I met Sam when I was working in the men's shelter And we, for many years now, we have electronic log, but back then we had a log book, and whatever shift you were working on, you basically wrote notes for the next person on the shift. So you'd write, so-and-so needs a late admit, or Mr. Smith needs to see the clinic, or something like that. And at change of shift, you would read the notes for the next shift, the old shift, the new shift, so everybody knew what was going on. And inevitably, you'd get a new staff person, and there'd be a note in there saying, Sam Smith needs a late admit. He's in Marblehead, and he's taking the train back from Marblehead, and he's in charge of the telescope in Marblehead. And Sam had schizophrenia. He had this entire fantasy about this big tower in Marblehead. That's actually, there is a tower out there. I don't think it's a CIA tower, but it's out there. Anyways, but there was no train from Marblehead, and Sam had this every night. That's what he'd tell you when he'd come in at like 2 in the morning. And of course, the new staff would read it, and everybody would laugh and be like, okay, Sam can have a late admit, because Sam got a late admit every night. Never took a bed, slept on the floor every single night that he came in, and he would sleep from about 3 in the morning till maybe 5, and then he'd get up and he would sell newspapers for the Globe. He would sleep outside during the day sometime. We wouldn't typically see him during the day. We could never get him on medication. Sam's one of those people who wasn't a danger to himself or a danger to anybody else. He was lovely, right? Never bothered anybody. He's one of the few people I ever personally barred because he had lice at one point and the entire place was gonna have it, and he would not let us cut his hair. He just had nothing to do with it. So we tried everything with Sam. We brought the Department of Mental Health in, our clinicians worked with him, and we could never, ever really engage him on anything. We tried to offer him housing and he said no. So I was at home one Sunday night and watching Downton Abbey, one night to have peace and quiet. I was like, everybody leave me alone, I'm going upstairs to watch Downton Abbey. My phone rings and it's somebody from the men's inn. Never a good thing for me to get a call on a Sunday night. And it was one of our men's and staff who said, listen, so we had bought this very tiny building at the end of our alley on Harrison Ave. And we bought it because we had a board member who noticed it went up for sale. And she said to me, we should buy that building, it's right next door, and it's only gonna get more expensive. We bought this very small apartment building, 6 apartments, not in great shape, but, and I went to the Department of Mental Health and said, look, we bought this little apartment building because we know we're gonna need more housing, but we've had this idea of trying to get people like Sam and some other people that are mentally ill that don't quite fit. They're not going to go to DMH. DMH is not going to come to them. How can we figure something out? And the guy running Boston DMH at the time said, well, look, I have a little bit of turn back money, and we've all been talking about this group that we can't get housed. We'll give you enough money for 2 years. It was a pilot. And I thought, okay, well, we'll take it. And we had to apply for it. It wasn't as automatic as that. But the agreement was there would be no requirements. So people we knew, no IDs, you didn't have to be on meds. Basically, it was all people we collectively knew that were either in shelter or on the street, and we agreed we'd let them in on a very low barrier basis, and that they didn't have to agree to anything in the beginning. And over time, we would try and engage them. So we bought the building, we did our own maintenance team did the work on it, they painted it, they did some of the other construction work on it. I get this call at home on Sunday night from a men's and staff person who said, hey, Sam wants to go see the new building. And I think, you're kidding. And he says, no, and I said, well, take him over. So they take Sam over to see the building, and he goes up to the top floor, to the 6th floor, and he says to the staff person, I'll take it. And the staff person says, there's nobody here, no staff. I don't even think there's a coffee pot. And Sam says, no, I want to stay here tonight. So the staff person calls me back and he says, you're not going to believe this, Sam wants to take it. And I'm like, okay, take him over, some blankets and a pillow and maybe something to eat and let him stay. And I said, but just promise me you guys are going to check on him. So by then it's like midnight. So they let Sam stay, they take over the blankets and the pillows, and the next morning they go to knock, and Sam's the only one in the building, by the way, nobody else is in there, and they knock on the door and there's no answer. And of course we're all now panicked that we did something really horrible, and we have to take the lock off, and we get inside the door and Sam's sleeping on newspaper on the floor, all his bags are on the bed, and we wake him up and he says, I was exhausted, I have not had a good night's sleep in like 25 years. And he said, you know, I could lock the door, I could see out the window, so I knew if anyone was coming, because he was very paranoid, and he said, what do I need to do to stay? And I'll tell you, everything at that minute for me was like, what have we done wrong here? Because all he wanted was a safe place to stay, somebody to check in on him, and someplace where he felt comfortable enough to start getting sleep. And so Sam moved in. He lived there until he went into a nursing home, and he had some real health issues. But you know, I know these are small victories. I will tell you that almost the entire time Sam stayed in shelter, we could rarely get him to take a shower and change his clothes. I mean, one of the horrible things every summer, we'd say to him, Sam, you gotta take off like those 4 coats, you're gonna get heat stroke. No, no, no. You know, he finally was able to start doing things like making his own breakfast and his own coffee, and he still walked around all the time, but he really blossomed there. He was an enormous classical music fan. And if you go up to his room, he had like classical music from everywhere, and he'd listen to it for a couple hours a day. I don't know anything about his background. We never had any contact with family members, but he really lived his life there. And I always say when people ask me about who's housing first for, it's for people like Sam who have no other option, and also for people like Sam who can manage some of it. He really did figure out a whole lot of things, and we were able to get him hooked up with healthcare and stuff that he would never have done had he been in shelter and on the train to Marblehead. So that's kind of really, when you hear people saying, you know, we shouldn't be doing this for people, we should be doing it for people like Sam, because Sam was going to end up inpatient in a psychiatric hospital somewhere, and it was going to cost us all a lot of money. And Sam really lived there with pretty minimal support after a while. He never went on medication, but you know, he was able to really manage himself. He was never a problem, and he built kind of a little social group with the rest of the guys are in that house, with the rest of the guys in the house. So the one thing I'll say is we spent a lot of time in Boston trying to keep our numbers low and really being responsive around homelessness because we're in such an expensive market. We have some really big headwinds coming at the federal level. Right now, the city gets money to fund this housing. We get some state money and some money via the city that comes from HUD. HUD right now is funding about 90% of some of the housing like this across the city, not just for us, for everybody else. And they're talking about shifting that down to about 30%. So it's people like Sam who are in these units, they don't have an alternative, which is why we started focusing on this group. We only started developing housing because nobody else wanted to build housing for the Sams of the world. Now we have people who do want to build housing as long as we'll provide the support. But Sam was never going to get housing in the regular market. He just wasn't, it was never going to happen for him. But we were able to give him a quality of life. We were able to save the system some money, and we were able to keep him out of any long-term hospitalization, both on the medical side and on the psychiatric side. So let me wrap up there. I know I've been rambling on here. Do people have questions or?
Excellent. I'll limit myself, I'll be that person too. One thing you said was that for you had to like 35 chronic housing people, and removing them into permanent housing brings up 150 beds. 150. How does that math work out?
So for the hospital people that are in the room, you will know this, that it's just like a hospital. So during COVID, if you all remember, you couldn't get a hospital bed because there were so many people in the hospital. And so if you ever went to the ER during COVID, as some of the hospital people in the room know, you couldn't even probably get a spot in the ER, or you would sit in the ER for 24, 48 hours. So if you move those people that are in a bed every single night out, they free up a lot of capacity for your middle range group that comes in. And part of the reason we have not had to add a whole lot of shelter beds in Boston, we've added some, is because if you keep the flow, there's 2 ways to fix this, right? One is you move people out faster so that you free up beds, right? And you don't let people ever get to that long-term stayer group. Hard to do. That was the point of that middle group getting a little bit of short-term resources, but it's not perfect. The other way to do it is to build more housing. In Boston, we're going to have to do both because we have a supply issue. But it's really it's nothing but a bed utilization strategy. But until people looked at the data around homelessness, nobody thought about bed utilization. People came in, took their bed, and we were like, okay. We just never spent the time to really dig into the data. And now we use the data all the time. We're looking at this data, every month. We're looking at who's stuck. We're working that by name list with the city to try and get people out. Oh, sorry.
So this is okay. So I work for HUD, and I work on the more FHA multifamily mortgage lending side. So I do sort of risk management for how much of the loan will insure. So a lot of the stuff you're talking about, I'm not in it other than seeing it after it's already been negotiated. But one of the things that is striking to me, there's a building on Beacon Hill that has 400 square foot units, and HUD pays about $3,200 for people to stay in those units. And you know, I cover a region that's DC to kind of outer Pennsylvania, like a large region. And you look at kind of ex-urban Pittsburgh, and HUD is paying maybe $750 for a unit that's twice the size. And I look at that and I say, gosh, I wonder about it from a taxpayer, fiduciary, not my own, but you know, as a society, what we think about that. Have you considered, as you place people, you know, we look at Springfield, we look at Chicopee, we look at places in our own state that are very low cost compared to Beacon Hill that is very high cost. I wonder about utilization of some of our lower cost areas in the state, or do you feel like there's a reason why that's not possible?
Yeah, I think, look, the Boston prices are horrible. I don't know how else to say it, and there's a lot of things driving it, right? What I would say is, as you know, the HUD markets are set on fair market. And so we have a whole scattered site program where we do place people, and we try really hard to get people to leave the city, frankly. We do everything we can to say, go to Brockton, or, you know, go somewhere where the rents are a little bit cheaper. And it's sometimes a hard sell because people's community is here, and it's really hard sometimes to convince them to do that. We can travel with our scattered site case management. We probably can't go too much farther than Brockton, because for people who need support, it's really hard to deliver it down there on a steady basis. So I don't disagree with you. One of the issues that's interesting is Lowell had more people on the street last year than Boston. So we're starting to see the gateway cities, their numbers are really increasing, because what you're starting to see is those rents that were affordable are now pushing up. They're not like Boston, but they're starting to push up. People are getting displaced there. Western Mass has an issue. It's different than here, no question about it, and it should be more fixable in Western Mass. Part of the problem there is you've got a transportation problem for people, and if people need services, they got to get to work. You know, we look at, especially for our rapid rehousing folks, we try and get them to move to Haverhill or places where we know rents are cheaper. If you're working, it's really hard to get you back into the city. So that's it. Yeah, I'm with you. It would be great. We need to find cheaper ways to build housing everywhere. And we need to be looking at modular and some of these, you know, there's, for those of you that do construction, you know, the fact that you need steel now after 5 stories. We got to start looking at some of this stuff, because that would probably bring the cost down by 30% if we could do wood frame. Construction's different now, and we haven't really, as a field, caught up with, I think, the new technology in construction, but there's a lot out there that I think could be better. I mean, look, the way I justify the Boston stuff, and I don't love it, is that everything we do, if we have any funding from the city of Boston, of which almost all of our buildings do have, it's affordable in perpetuity. So it can never be converted to market, it can never be sold. Well, let me put it this way, it could be sold, we'd have to pay all the money back that we owe the city, and the buildings aren't probably worth that. So all of these buildings that the city puts affordable dollars into, they're restricted, deed restricted in perpetuity. You could sell them to another nonprofit that keeps it affordable, but you can't go out and sell it on the market. Allison, sorry, and then.
First of all, thank you. This has been amazing. For people who are looking at the slides, you may not have noticed on the Jamaica Plain building, and then the lower left, there was a picture of the front of the building, and it said to Lyndia. And that is so well-deserved, so appropriate, and such great thanks from the city of Boston to you from everything that you and your staff have done. So that's wonderful. So I do have a follow-up question, since we're a women's organization. Can you talk a little bit about what the women's inn is like as compared with the men's inn?
Yeah.
And then also, as we head into the holidays and the cold weather, people like to help at this time of year, how we can help Pine Street.
Yep, thank you for that. Allison's been a volunteer for, oh my God, how many years? Dating ourselves here again, at least 20, more than
We got
that.
married 25 years ago, we didn't need gifts, and we said, we picked a few organizations, and Pine Street was one of them, and it's been a joy to be involved since then, and it's been incredible to see the housing and everything the staff has done, and what Lyndia has helped to shepherd for the city of Boston.
Well, thank you for all those gifts. Allison and David are like our best gift wrappers ever. They're like the fastest gift wrappers we have. Let me say a couple of things about the women's inn. So the women's inn is nicer than the men's inn, frankly. It's got carpeting and nice colors. We've got bathtubs. We've got some sewing machines and washing machines. I hate to be so sexist, but the guys don't really have any of that. They didn't ask for it. The women did. And also the women's building was new. And so the men's building has really been around since about 1980. The women's inn we renovated probably 30 years ago, but we were able to really go in with a blank slate and say to them, what do you want? And so we were able to customize it. The top floor of the women's inn has 12 elderly women who are mentally ill who live upstairs in their own rooms. They have a shared kitchen and bath, and a kind of a TV room and where they do their games and their activities. And then the rest of the building has the men's dorm, and I didn't put a picture of it in here, is really just, looks like a big army barrack, honestly. The women have partitions and nice bedspreads, and we've just been able to make it homier. But I gotta tell you, the road for the women is so much tougher, so much tougher. It's part of the, men tend to go to the street earlier, women won't go until there is nothing left. And by the time we see a lot of the women, they're struggling with trauma. There's been a lot of domestic abuse. Even though we are not a domestic violence shelter, very rare that I hear of the women don't have some domestic abuse somewhere in their background. Higher level of mental illness, and just women who are struggling with, even if they're working, they might be working in a hotel, cleaning the rooms. They might be working in a kitchen somewhere, but they're just not making enough money to afford rent in Boston. And for our older women who are on a fixed income, it's really difficult. The other thing I'll say about the women's inn is they tend to have more activities and more fun. So, we love people coming in and wanting to do game night with the women. We've had singing groups in. They haven't done a fashion show recently. They were doing fashion shows for a while, but the women really enjoy it. We've done some artwork with the women, and it's really a way for them to get out of the kind of drudgery that I call homelessness, where you gotta hurry up and wait. You fill out housing applications and you wait, and you go get your ID and you wait and wait and wait. So we try really hard to think about fun stuff for the women to do. We do have a ton of books, and a lot of the women read, a lot of the women knit and have stuff they do. But it's really hard. There's so much more trauma with the women, and so much more, what's the word I would use? They're really fearful. They're very fearful. They're very fearful about what's next, and they're very fearful even about us placing them in housing where they're gonna feel safe. We hear that a lot from the women. But the shelter itself is really, it's been designed, I think, with the women in mind. Again, it's not perfect, and it's incredibly crowded right now. We have, right now, 90 beds for women. We've got about 25 women sleeping on the floor in cots, and it's not even cold yet. So I expect that number to come up. And then what I would say is, look, we love having people's help, both on the volunteer side, on the financial side, on the, there's a whole bunch of things. You can go on our website. Becky Crawford's here from our head of our development team, and sitting in the back. We've got a group that does welcome baskets, for example, when people are moving into a new apartment, with toilet paper and towels and dishwashing liquid and soap powder. I mean, stuff you don't think about, but if you don't have a lot of money, that stuff really adds up. And we like to give people one new set of sheets, one new bedspread, right? So they really feel like they're moving into something new. We've got a group that does that. We've got groups that come in and serve lunch and dinner. I've got a lot of volunteers around the holidays. Lots of stuff on our website. And if you're interested in something particular, talk to Becky or I, but there are tons of opportunities on the website. People ask me a lot about, what do we ask for people on the street? Gift cards, like Dunkin' Donuts gift cards, Walgreens or CVS gift cards. gives people a chance to get in out of the cold, get a hot drink when it gets, as the weather gets colder, but it gives also people a place to be kind of normal. They can go in and sit somewhere and feel like everybody else for a little while. So those things go a long way. We always have those on the van. We use them in the shelter. We use them a lot on the van to get people to engage with us. I've got Dunkin' Donuts card. You want to go have a cup of coffee with me, for folks that may not want to talk to us any other way. So, but Allison, thank you for that. Did you have a question?
Mine was the same question.
Oh, great.
When you talk to people like us, what can we do?
So I think, look, go on our website. There's other organizations doing a lot of great work in the city. St. Francis House is right around the corner. We've got a lot of support from faith-based groups in the city. Trinity Church has been a longtime partner. St. Paul's over here on Washington Street. Great partners. They're doing a lot of stuff during the day. A lot of feeding programs during the day, especially during the winter. They're not all of them are all year. Lots of stuff on the website. If you see folks outside, and I get asked about this a lot, which is the only reason I'm going to bring it up, I typically don't give people money. I do give people gift cards. Just because, then I know people will get something to eat, even if they're going to go to CVS, and maybe they'll get something to eat, maybe they'll get something they need, cough drops or something like that. So there's plenty of ways to engage with folks. This area of the city, I would say, is relatively busy. Other pockets of the city, it's kind of up and down a little bit. It's actually picked up down here more so. And that's because as people get displaced from other parts of the city, they kind of go where they feel safe. So, other questions or stuff I didn't?
Oh, I was just going to say, I just was in San Francisco, and the work that you're doing, it really is like such a stark contrast. So I know all this is very complex. I used to do some volunteering in a different state, but it's, it's complex, and there's just so many different facets, and what you're doing is like tremendous, your dedication, and just, so thank you.
Well, thank you. For those of you that travel, I had an interesting discussion last week with one of our elected folks from Washington about these potential HUD cuts. And she said, other people come here from DC and say our numbers on the street are really small. I'm like, so what? The reason they're so small is that we're doing all this, and if that goes away, they're not going to be small anymore. It's not completely by accident, and if you kind of pull the rug out. But I do think we have to be careful and not be complacent, because I'll tell you, 15 years ago, San Francisco did not look like that. They had a handle on it, they had shelters, they were moving people. The kind of tide tipped, and they could not right the ship. Now they're working on it, and the numbers are coming down in San Francisco, but it has been really difficult. So we've got to really, if you don't keep your foot on the gas on this stuff, it's very easy for it to, I think, we'll start to see those kind of increasing numbers we don't want to see.
I was really curious about, say one of us in the room or a friend of a friend found themselves out of shelter tonight. Is there a specific number they call? What is the experience like when they go to Pine Street Inn?
So if you come, if people walk in to either the men's or the women's inn tonight, they'll get wait lists for a bed. They'll probably get a bed, they'll get a bed or they'll get a spot in the lobby. So they'll come in, we'll do a little, very brief intake, and then if they stay more than a day or two, we'll get the intake staff tomorrow to get some more info, see what we can do to help them problem solve. So now probably folks would get a spot in the lobby because it's a rainy, cold night. If it's 80 degrees on Saturday, you'll get a bed. I mean, that's the reality to a certain extent. We have some folks on the street who do come in when it gets colder and rainy like this, but in the warm weather, we have a lot of folks who stay out. Shelter is very rigid in a lot of ways, and it's hard for people. So either if you came to the men's or women's inn, you could get a bed, a spot in the lobby, or we could say, look, we'll put you on the wait list for a bed, and if the beds aren't full by like midnight, you can go upstairs and you can take a bed, sit in the lobby and wait for a bed. There's a number on the website that you can call. The city has a 311 number that's manned 24/7. You can call 311. If we don't have room, typically we would call the city shelter, and if we can't either get someone a bed or into the lobby, we just take them down to the city shelter. Boston in the winter, not the rest of the year, in the winter has had a tradition of letting everybody in the winter. So we have never turned people away in the winter. It's getting harder, I'll be honest, because as you saw, those shelter numbers are going up. And again, if we can't build more shelter, we got to move more people out faster. So we're working really hard to make sure we can continue to do that. Oh, sorry, in the back?
You said earlier that during COVID, people were too scared to come to the shelter. So where did they go?
So COVID was fascinating, to say the least. So during the early stages of COVID, we had talked to the folks in San Francisco who were literally like 3 days ahead of us on COVID. We had called them and said, "What are you guys doing?" And they said, we're leasing up hotels and we're trying to find any congregate space because it's spreading like crazy here. And of course, nobody knew what was going to happen to people. We have a lot of people that are compromised, immunocompromised. So we managed to, within probably a couple of months, we were getting cases all over the place. And we got the Department of Public Health, along with Healthcare for the Homeless, to come in and do some random testing. I think at the highest, about 38% of our folks were testing positive for COVID. So you can see that, right? The general population was probably in the 10% where people could isolate. We were up around 38%. And I think the word got out and people started leaving. At the same time, the public health department was saying to us, don't let anybody new in, keep who you have, and we'll work with you on whatever we can do around infection control. And so people stayed outside. Street numbers went up by about 20-30%, and people just made a decision to stay out so they wouldn't get sick. And even in the winter, we had folks stay out. Some people doubled and tripled up and went back to where they might have been before, and that lasted not very long, and then that situation fell apart and they came back to the streets. We're probably last year, the year before, we've started to see the shelter numbers tick back up again, and I think it's partially because, well, two things. One is any of the COVID relief money is now going away, not just for individuals, but there was a lot of COVID relief money for housing and other things, and that's pretty much gone. So I think you are going to see somewhat of an uptick where people used to, temporarily to rent something, even if they knew it wasn't forever. Oh, sorry.
You started at Pine Street for just 6 months, and then 1 more year. How did you get here today?
Oh my God, I don't know. So what happened? So let's see. After I had the job working with volunteers, the woman who hired me, her name is Sue Pacheco, she went over to run all the programs at Pine Street, which is really what she had wanted to do. She was kind of on the public relations, and she was writing our newsletter and at the time in charge of fundraising, but she had a program background and she wanted to run the program. So she moved over to run the programs, and the person who was running the men's shelter was leaving, and she called me and said, you should put your name in. And I said, why would I do that? I don't know anything about this. And I think I was 28. And she said to me, that's okay, I'll help you, and what you don't know, I will teach you. And I said to her, you can't give me this job. I'm like younger than half the people down there, and they're smarter than me. They know what's going on. She's like, no, you can do it. And much to her credit, she mentored me along, and it was hard, I have to say, and it was, a bit of a different time. It was, we had a lot of staff in recovery. We were much more focused on shelter. And, but we figured it out. And, a lot of it is we've just had amazing staff. And staff were so gracious to me and taught me what I didn't know. They really did. And people like Richie Mack and Sam and lots of people. And then I ran the men's shelter for 3 years, and the fellow who was running Pine Street at the time, we decided we needed to do a capital campaign, and that's when we, I think, built the new women's shelter. We had bought a building, but we didn't have the money to renovate it. So I went over to run fundraising for about 8 or 9 years. And then I went back over to the program side as we were starting to expand housing. And then when my predecessor left, my 2 people on the board said, you should put your hat in the ring. And I said, no, really, I've got enough going on here. And they said, well, look, what do you have to lose? You either get a new boss or you get the job. And I got the job. I will tell you, it was not in my plan, absolutely not in my plan. My kids were young. I just was like, no. But you know what? It's never a place where the tail has wagged the dog. It's always been mission first. We have an incredible board. We have great staff, but the guests are, I wish everybody could talk to somebody who's homeless and hear their whole story, because you just grow to love the folks that are struggling and the fact that they're willing to keep trying and keep doing it and persevere with it when they've been through horrific things. So, you know, it's a fabulous place, and I view this as I simply get to be the placeholder for a little while. The place is really a very different, it's kind of got a life of its own. It really does, but, so, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I actually came for a personal reason. So I work in the building next to Pine Street Inn. I'm one of the artists in the building next door. And there is a man a block away from us that he lives on the street, and I bring him lunch a lot. And when I say, you know, do you know about Pine Street Inn? That's right there. And he's like, oh no.
No, I know, yeah.
So in your mind, in your experience, I guess, well, A, I wonder what is that about, and B, how I can sort of have a conversation with him, not to convince him,
Yeah.
but about it.
Yeah.
I don't
So
know.
Liz, grab me after, I'll give you my card, and I'll get the street team to come down and talk to him. He doesn't have to come to Pine Street to get housing. I mean, we housed just under 100 people last year from the street, where we filled out applications right on the street. If he doesn't want to come in, he'll have to wait on the street until something opens up, but still, he's gonna wait on the street no matter what.
Can I bring him to you then?
Yeah, if he'll come in, yeah. I want to make sure there's someone there, though, that can work with him and try and talk to him about housing or whatever's going on with him, but I'll give you my card. Here's what I'd say about shelter for those of you that haven't been down. It's really crowded. It's very, it's pretty regimented, right? You get up when we tell you to get up, you eat when we tell you to eat, you take a shower on our schedule. It's really hard for people. There's no other way to run a place that big. I don't know how else to say it. We've tried to, and the women's inn's a lot more flexible. Like the women's inn's opened all day, and you know, the women have more flexibility because it's just smaller. But it's really hard, and I understand why people say no to shelter. People have gotten robbed in shelter. It happens. We try and do everything we can to not let it happen. And then some people just don't want to give up any freedom, and you can't blame them. The other thing I'll say is, you can't use in our shelters. You can come in high, you can come in not being on meds, but you can't bring bottles or weapons or needles or anything in the building. And for some people, they can't really survive all night without getting high. That's a lot of what's going on, by the way, down at MassCast. People cannot, they're gonna get really sick if they stop using, which is why they're not coming into shelter. Now, not everybody down there's homeless, frankly, but nevertheless. So it's a whole bunch of different reasons. You know, there's a woman that I see almost every day on my way out when I go down by South Bay, and she panhandles almost every day. She's an older woman, and I keep saying to her, look, I'll get you a bed. She's like, no, I don't like the people there. I'm like, okay. And I keep saying to her, listen, I could probably get you upstairs where you'd have your own room, not right away. No, she doesn't want to come in. You know, she's actively using, and she's funny. She'll say to me sometimes, you know, I had a huge fight down there. I'm like, really? If you had a huge fight, I would know you. We don't, let me say this, we have our fights, but the women's in, we don't have as many. We get a lot of kind of dodgy back and forth stuff, but we don't get that, so we get more of the, but I just, you know, some people don't want to come in. I mean, you can see from the numbers, most people in Boston do come in, but it's really hard if you, and for folks that are mentally ill in particular, there's a lot of stimulation in shelter. You know, if you come into the men's inn tonight, it's gonna be 400 guys there, right? You're gonna be eating at your eating shift with, you know, 150 of them. You don't know them, it's loud. It's, you know, shelter's not perfect. Part of the reason we started doing so much more housing is that we know shelter's not perfect. But I'll see if I can get somebody to get down and talk to them.
I read that Tracy Kidder book called Road Sleepers, which I thought was fascinating about why people choose to stay outside versus going to shelter. Did he interview you? I mean, I know the Pine Street Inn was mentioned a lot.
Yeah, he interviewed me about really Jim O'Connell, who Jim and I kind of started at the same, right about the same time, Jim a little bit after, but you know, I see Jim and I have breakfast every couple of months, and both commiserate and argue about all kinds of things. But anyways, having said that, the book was fabulous. I think there's a particular group of people that never come in, and Liz, he may be one of these guys that never comes in. And that needs a different strategy. It needs outreach, it needs kind of housing right on the street, it needs, you know, in some cases, I mean, Healthcare for the Homeless is doing some of this. They're doing treatment right on the street, not just medical treatment, they're doing opioid treatment. They're trying to get people on Suboxone right on the street. It's very hard to do because you gotta take blood work and all the stuff you all know about, but it's, So I think the more we can do on the street for that group that doesn't come in, we need to keep trying to figure that out. But yeah, shelter's hard. There's no way around it. I wish I could tell you it wasn't hard. And we do everything we can to make it as amenable as possible, but it's, yeah, I sometimes go upstairs and think, God, how is it that, you gotta sleep with these 300 or 400 people you've never met, they're all strangers, you don't know who they are, you gotta try and get a good night's sleep so you can get up and go to work the next day if you're working, or get to an appointment. It's crazy. It's either that or the street. Boston, relatively speaking, we have had pretty low barrier shelters. Part of the reason San Francisco ended up where it did is they started making the shelters harder to get into. And people said, oh, just make it any harder, I'm just not going in at all. And that kind of started some of this. Not all of it, but it was some of it. So, any other questions? No, thank you very much for coming.